I am Jimbo Paris, and you are listening to The Jimbo Paris Show. All right, how's it going, everyone? This is Jimbo Paris. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Dr. Thomas Covington. He's spent over about 10 years in the United States Army. And, he's also the founder of his own speaking program. And he essentially is a prominent military leader that turned into an educational advocate. So, a very successful man that sort of accomplished a lot of things. And I definitely want to learn more about him. So, yeah, how's it going, Tom?
Thanks, Jimbo. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's an honor and a privilege. So, to get this started, can you tell me a bit about yourself, who you are, what you're about, and what your message is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like you said before, I spent 10 years with the Army Special Forces, primarily in forensic science and doing a lot of operations. And after that, really, I transitioned over, like you said, into education, where I get a lot of questions about that, actually, about how do you go from working with the military to over to education. But really what I saw a lot of spending, countless tours overseas and time in preparation for the military and serving our country, but also our allies and operations that we had. There was so much need, I guess, for education from both sides of the fence, if that makes sense. So much education culturally that we needed to be in other countries and operate accordingly, but also cross-training military organizations or doing any other types of educational programs. I mean, it even come down to quite literally building schools in these areas as well. So there's a lot of gap that a lot of people think exists, but it actually doesn't. There's so much educational and training that goes into all of these processes and the humanitarian efforts that the military also conducts that really just kind of inspired me to make that transition. And how do I take what I know and my experiences and give back outside of the military? What does that look like afterwards? And transition over into higher ed with my background being in education. And I spent that time building programs that I needed to do, essentially to remove a disconnect, from that gap from industry to higher ed. And that's kind of where I found my niche.
So I think we'll get more into your
Sure.
transition into sort of the humanitarian efforts. But for the meantime, I'm interested in sort of what was your motivation to join the military? Because I'm not really a part of the military, so I tend to have a difficulty kind of understanding how you sort of get the motivation or how you get the drive to go into that.
Sure. And I didn't come from a huge military family, or it wasn't any type of like legacy or lineage. My brother had served for a few years, but did something completely different. And it was long before I served. He had been in and out before I ever even considered joining the military. I was actually in college at the time. And when I decided to join the military, it was kind of a double-edged sword, so to speak. There was one aspect of it to where I wanted to do something more than be a student, which is kind of ironic. I actually quit college to join the military. And it was funny because I had a really good GPA, and my recruiter at the time actually didn't want to let me join the military, whose job is it to actually recruit and put people in the military. Didn't want to let me actually join. And he was like, just go back to class, kid. But, I was kind of persistent and I just really wanted to join. I mean, there's other aspects to it as well. Like, you have the GI Bill that helps you pay for college. So if I did want to go back to college, I would have that funding after serving that initial few years. But really, I mean, I grew up in this tiny town in Alabama and there's nothing going on. And, me being in college was one of the highlights of my young life experience, but paled in comparison really to obviously my experiences that I had while in the military. So I call it being young and dumb, but it was invaluable really to give me a learning opportunity and being in a leadership opportunity at a very young age. So I'm forever grateful for that, and really opened my eyes to inspire me to do ultimately what I'm doing today.
So you mentioned sort of that want and that desire. So you didn't come from a military family. So where did that urge come from? Was it person? Did you look up to people or
No, I mean, it's like I said, it wasn't like I knew people who had served in various different capacities, but I wasn't really like close to them. And to be honest, it wasn't like I was so inspired by 9/11 or some military movie, or I didn't really have that. So it was just kind of like I was wanting to do something different, and retrospectively looking at it, I think it had a lot to do with, I mean, finances was part of it. It was, I was going to make more money in the military than I was going to make working in retail or whatever I was doing as a college kid. But it's not like you're going to get rich joining the military by no means. But that was part of it. It was just multifaceted. It was just kind of like an analytical decision. It was like, hey, man, I can make a little bit more money if I do this. There is that GI Bill. If I do want to come back to college, I have that money that's kind of set aside. So I'll have that kind of in my hip pocket. But also while I'm in, I can attend school and college classes for free. So I have that resource available. So I was just it's kind of like a pros and cons kind of decision. And it was just like, I had more pros than cons. I mean, obviously the con is I can get shot in the face and die. So there's that. I mean, I'd seen several people my age that had died in ATV accidents, who had died in, playing basketball out on the park and just had a massive heart attack, So I guess to me at the time, it wasn't like, being 19, you just kind of think you're invincible. Like, well, this won't happen to me. I'll just join and I'll be cool and I'll never have to deploy, and and I'll be fine, and I'll do my 3 years and get out. And that was my plan, actually. So to just do one tour and get a little bit of life experience and figure out what I wanted to do afterwards, and go back to school at that time, and just kind of put adulting on pause, if that made sense. But little did I know I was about to do something very adult. So, and it was just kind of an inexperienced decision, which I think a lot of people who join the military can resonate with that logic at the time. And then, because you really don't know what it is unless you've done it. And you can talk to tons of military people, and it's really hard to explain unless you have that kind of shared experience. But I was grateful for all the opportunities that I got. Like I said, I went into leadership very young. There's an academy. It's called the NCO Academy, or the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy. It's how they actually train you to be a sergeant, how to get your stripe, so to speak. And I was in that academy within my first year in the military, which was wild. I remember when I showed up, the leadership at the academy, the commandant, thought it was a mistake that I was there because I was so young and so low in rank. They're like, what is this guy doing here? And they checked my orders and called my chain of command, my leadership, and they're like, hey, no, this guy's supposed to be here training. So found myself in leadership positions, wearing sergeant stripes relatively quickly and progressing through those ranks.
how did it feel going in there, being so young and new and fresh? Did it
It's kind of
affect
the
you in any
beauty of
way?
it. It's kind of the beauty of it, because if having no prior knowledge to a situation, there's always, of course, the fear of the unknown, but I've always just kind of had just my personality, I guess, I've always just had this eagerness to learn, which is kind of ironic for someone saying they just dropped out of college, but they had an eagerness to learn. But quite honestly, at that time, I felt like college was kind of failing me in my eagerness to learn, in kind of an ironic approach. I didn't see the point of the classes. Some of the credentials of some of my professors were suspect, So when you're taking a business class from someone who's never owned a business, I'm not knocking college. I have a doctorate degree, obviously, but at 18 years old, and I'm taking a business class from a professor who's never owned a business or worked in the business industry, it's like, how are you preparing me to be in the business industry? So I just kind of had those kind of thoughts at that time in my life. I didn't understand at all. I won't say really, I didn't understand at all how higher education worked, or how people become a professor and who's chosen and why they are credible. It was just kind of my immaturity and inexperience at the time. And led me on to an organization and a system where in the military where nobody is in a position. You don't start as a captain, you don't start as a general or a sergeant or whatever. Everyone starts at the bottom. So whatever you're going through, whether it's professionally or personally, there's a lot of people you can fall back on, whether it's your own peer group, which you make some of the best friends you'll ever make in your life, or even your subordinates. There's a lot you can learn from the people you lead as well, just from the diversity that is within the ranks. It's the most diverse organization I've ever been a part of. And at least in my experience, race, gender, skin color, ideologies, theologies, whatever, none of that mattered. So the only thing that mattered was your individual performances. So that was something I could resonate with, that made sense to me. And I was fortunate enough to have a lot of good leadership in my time that quite frankly worked their way and earned and deserved to lead other people. And I was grateful for that. Not only my own opportunities of leadership, but also my opportunities to follow some other great leaders as well.
And that is pretty insane. And I think something else that's really flickering in my mind right now is the fact that you're a paratrooper, correct?
Yeah, jumped out of airplanes for 9 of those 10 years. So that's a story within itself. I remember getting ready to go to my first Special Forces unit, 3rd Special Forces Group. And at the time, it was called Fort Bragg in North Carolina, young private at the time. And they said, well, in order to go there, you have to be a paratrooper. Everyone's a paratrooper there. And when I joined the military, I didn't even know what a paratrooper was. Seeing these movies and had heard about these, special units and all of this stuff. And of course, I always took that kind of with a grain of salt, like nothing's ever like it is on TV, which is true. But they're like, hey, you got to go do this. It's only 3 weeks is how they sell it to you. And we'll pay you an extra, I don't know what it was at the time, $160 a month or something, if you do it as a hazard pay, so, and they gave me all these reasons of why I should do it. And they're like, and plus you can be in special forces if you do this. And I was like, okay. Went to the course and did the 3-week course. And the first 2 weeks of that 3 weeks is just learning how to land and not hurt yourself. You're learning how to jump out of an aircraft properly. You're learning all of the things that go into it, the safety aspect. So you literally spend, good Lord, 12 to 15 hours a day learning safety for 2 weeks and just running and falling and all of these different things. And the reason they spend so much time training you to fall is because those parachutes can land. They're designed, they're not quite like the parachuting you see in the football games where they land on the 50-yard line and they land on their feet and the crowd cheers. These parachutes are designed for war, so they're designed to get you to the ground as fast as possible without killing you or actually making contact with the ground. You're actually coming in relatively quickly, and you can be up to, depending on how the wind is that day, you may be landing on the ground at 15, 16 miles an hour. And the way I describe that to people, if you want to see what that's like, stand on the back of a pickup truck going through a field at 16 miles an hour and jump off the back. That's what it's like. So, and you do that over and over and over again. It's very important to learn how to fall. And a lot of fighters can resonate with that, how to land, how to fall when you get hit so you don't get hurt from actually falling. And a lot of people do. There's a lot of people in training who break their legs or break their arms or break their collarbones because they're not doing what they're taught to do properly. And it is dangerous. And that's if your parachute works, which most of the time it does. And you do have a reserve parachute, so technically you jump with 2. And I explained this to people too, and I was like, if you've ever taken a piece of paper, rolled down your window and threw it out of your car door going on the interstate like 70 miles an hour, double that speed and replace that piece of paper with your body. That's kind of what it's like jumping out of the side of an airplane. It's going so fast, by the time you jump out and your parachute opens and you look back up, like you can barely see the airplane because it's so far away from you. But you can't get complacent there because you are approaching that ground quicker than you think. So to what they're talking about and what all your training's got to kick in at this point. So whatever hundreds of hours that you've trained to make this landing, and the cadre are on the ground with megaphones, like reminding you, like, hey, do A, B, C, So I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do that. I forgot, So finished out my jumps, and years later, a full circle moment. In the end, when you graduate, they pin your wings on your uniform, so your airborne wings. So you're officially a paratrooper then. Full circle moment is going back to the schoolhouse years later to pin wings on my own subordinate soldiers as they graduate. So it's just kind of this lineage of paratroopers, one to the next, of being trained and training the next one. But man, if you can, in the paratrooper community, there's a lot of tough guys or whatever you want to call it, but who act like it's nothing but, and try to play it cool, and you can do it 100 times and it's still, and I was like, man, if you guys are up in this plane and you're just desensitized to this, like, I don't know. I never got desensitized to it. Like I said, we try to play it cool and whatever, but there's always that anxiety until that parachute opened. So it's a good way to spend your 20s. It's a little hard on your body once you get a little older, but it was an honor and a privilege for me to be part of a very historic lineage in our country's history. You should try it. He's like, nah,
yeah, that's the question. So so I'm assuming like you never had a fear of heights or.
Oh, I had a huge fear of heights. Absolutely. Huge fear of heights. Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid of everything. I'm afraid of spiders. I'm afraid of snakes. I'm afraid of rats. I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of like all sorts of different things. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of people actually make that assumption. And I was like, man, it's mental resiliency. Just like you have to overcome, like your mind is going to tell you you can't do anything, but it's not true, so it's really up to you to overcome that mentality, but also understand the why. And I think that's a super important thing. And I don't think, to me at least, I could never mentally overcome something unless I understood the why. So, but yeah, and it was like once I got the whys behind stuff, then there was nothing really stopping me. I mean, I couldn't do 50 push-ups before I joined the military and didn't understand why. By the time I left the military, I could do 200. I mean, it's like, why do I need to do this? Well, you need to be strong. It's like I couldn't run a mile before I joined the military. When I left, I was running half marathons. Why do I need to be able to run so far? Well, what if you need to run away? Oh, well, that makes sense. So it's a lot of common sense stuff, but there's always, that analytical aspect of my personality, I guess, that's going to ask that why. If I don't have a why, quite frankly, I'm just not going to do it. So if I don't understand why and the time that I'm putting into something, then I'm just going to put it into something else that I deem myself to be constructive and positive.
Fascinating. And I'm thinking now, so you basically did all of this, and now you sort of made a transition to the more humanitarian route, and you
Right.
sort of got into academia once again. So how did you go into that, eventually attaining that new perspective in higher education, and then kind of going into that speaking program?
Well, like I said, I did a lot of early on, and I remember, I was on my first deployment in Afghanistan, and it was really profound for many different reasons. But, for one, just like I said again, I mean, the first time I ever left the country in my life as any type of travel, any type of anything on an airplane was to go to Afghanistan. So, like, I'd never traveled to Mexico. I'd never went to Europe, but so when you kind of take a step back from it and you really start asking yourself, it's like not a conscientious objector. It's like, I don't object from the military operations or what they're doing. Honestly, I worked in intelligence for 10 years. I see the need and understand the why, but I also understand that it's not black and white, I guess. I'll explain it this way. So the question, what is war? I get that a lot. So war, in Dr. Thomas Covington's definition of it, is never good versus bad. and it's always subjective. I'm sure if you asked Al Qaeda who a terrorist was, they would tell you the Americans who occupied our country for 20 years. It's a fair point. But it's order versus chaos. That's how I defined it. So there's always an order. Date it back to whatever year you want to, whether it's the killing Europeans over Europe or Europeans trying to make the colonies fall in line before the revolution, or whatever scenario, war, the Persians and the Russian, or the Spartans, or pick a war, Rome, expansion, whatever. It's always, 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 at least in my opinion, order versus chaos. So there's an order that's being maintained by some hierarchy or government or monarch or whatever the case may be. And that order doesn't benefit everybody. There's no order that will benefit everybody, which is a foundational aspect of political differences. So there's an order that doesn't benefit a group of people, inserts chaos into that order, and the order has two options. They can adapt to the chaos, or they can snuff out the chaos and to maintain their order, and that is war. So when you understand the order versus the chaos, and you understand people, no matter your culture, no matter, strip away your race or religion or gender or ideologies or theologies or spirituality or whatever the case may be, everybody kind of essentially wants the same thing. Everybody wants to get up and do whatever it is they want to do, be left alone, and for better or for worse, with the people they want to do it with. So it could be positive, it could be negative. That's subjective, and human nature are prone to self-harm anyway. So, I mean, which is why bars exist, right? So we self-harm for entertainment. So how could I help in that? So in my spare time, when I wasn't freedom fighting, I was, ironically enough, going to school, taking classes, going to school online, taking night class, whatever the case may be. And I got an associate's degree, and got a bachelor's degree, got a master's degree, and got most of my doctorate degree done before I got out. And when I got out, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew everything I'd wanted to do in the military, I had done. So there was plenty more I could have done, plenty more I probably could have achieved if I'd applied myself or wanted to do that, whether it be a new school or a new job or, leadership role or whatever. I really didn't have any interest in that, and my heart wasn't in it, so I wasn't in it. I felt the time was right to make that transition. And really at that 10-year mark, it's kind of every soldier's career is kind of a decision you need to make. Are you going to stay to 20 years and retire, or are you going to call it? Because really, if you're going to do 15 years, you might as well do 20. And people would always come to me like, well, it's only 10 more years. I'm like, that's a long time. Like, I just spent 10 years in the military, and you're saying do 10 more like it's, 2 weeks or a year or something, so I was like, I was getting out. As I was transitioning out, I was about to turn 29, and I had so this was my 9-year mark. So I was about to turn 29 and planning on getting out that year. And quite honestly, like, my body was hurting me from just being in the military, so I'm getting old quick and I'm deteriorating, and, so all of this factored into my decision. I was like, man, I can't. There are some people who can jump out of airplanes for 20 years. I just don't think I'm one of them. So I think it takes a special type of body type to be able to do that. And a lot of genetics, and I think, goes into it too. And again, so it was like I was 10 years later in life, but in the same mental position. I want to do something different. I want to make more money than I'm making now. And I want to experience something I've never experienced. So that was kind of the same logic that I had to join the military. So now, fast forward 10 years in the future, this is the logic I have to get out of the military. So instead of really jumping into employment or really trying to dig for a job, which I probably should have been doing, I was granted, in the last 6 months of my military career, I was granted, I won't say early leave, but I didn't have to report anymore. I just needed to kind of ride out my contract. So I was talking to my boss. My replacement had already come in. I'd already trained my replacement. He was working every day. There was only one desk, so I didn't even have a desk anymore, so my team was in great hands. So I was like, man, I feel like being here would be more negative than positive. If I'm coming to work every day, I want to do something. I want to be involved. But I really need to step away and let this other leader lead. And I don't need to tell him how to lead. I just need to let him lead. So like my predecessor did before me. So, hey, this is what we got going on. Here's the training. Here's the keys. Train and guide them well. Don't let anybody die. Good luck. So I wanted to reciprocate that level of respect that was given to me. Now I got 6 months. What do you do? Well, common sense would tell you to go get a job and draw double paychecks for the next 180 days for only working one job, right? Common sense is not common, as the old saying goes. I was like, well, this is a perfect opportunity for me to explore passion projects. So I started looking, and I met with tons of mentors. I mean, 3-letter agency people, intelligence opportunities, specialized opportunities, even forensic opportunities in higher ed, ironically enough. And none of that really just wasn't doing it for me. And it's like, well, and then like one was even like trying to relocate me to Florida and like move me and give me a job. And I could essentially be doing a lot of the same things I was doing in the military, just make more money and do it in a better place, which sounded great at the time. And I was like, but what do I want to do? And I started volunteering in higher ed to work as an administrative assistant for this college president who is retired Navy, by the way. So he was also a veteran and in higher ed, but he was a generation older than me. So this was the mentor that I picked. And after sifting through a bunch of different potential opportunities, he was the guy and had a great personality. I think that's probably what won me over. He's super charismatic and easiest going guy. He never thought he had a high stress day, like he never had a bad meeting and that was different to me, so I was like, man, I would like to be in a workplace where everybody's positive every day. That's, that's coming from the military. That's drastically different. Great leaders, just hardened men, served 20 years in combat. And then I'm just in this place where everybody's so nice to me. And I was like, man, this is cool. Like I'm literally going to work every day for free because I liked it so much. I remember I'd worked there for like 3 weeks or something. And I'm sitting in the president's office. We're getting ready for a meeting, and I'm just in the back as a fly on the wall. I'm a sponge, I'm just happy to be there, So, and he's like, Tom, why do you come here every day? And I was like, because you told me to, you told me I could. He's like, well, I know. I was like, I'm glad to have you, but you could be doing anything. Why are you here? And I was like, I'm just glad to be here, I've learned, like every day I come here, I learn something new. Like this is, man, I waited my whole life for this, So I was like, your job is crazy interesting. You're always meeting new people and doing new things. And I'm getting to meet a ton of new people and learn new things. And the college at the time was a trade school, and they had 19 different programs. So, and they had a welding program. They had a diesel engine program. They had a mechanic program. They had a dental program. They had medical program, cosmetology, any trade you could think of. CAD. I mean, they had students building 3D models on lines and, all kind of different stuff. And I got to meet with all these different instructors, and every one of these instructors were industry professionals, which, going back to earlier in my story, why did I quit college? Because I felt like my teachers were not industry professionals, or at least some of them. And I was like, well, this is great. These trades programs are outstanding because all the teachers are 20, 30-year experts in their field, turned teacher. I got to eventually work in other aspects because I come in one day and met with the president. He, called me in one morning, had a one-on-one meeting, which was new. Like we never had that before. And he asked me how would I like to work there full time. I was like, dude, I was working here for free. If you paid me to come here, that'd be great. So he was like, well, we love to have you. And I then expanded into a position that covered all 4 campuses of the school, worked on what they called special projects, but it was all aspects of curriculum development, professional development for instructors, technology integrations, apprenticeship programs, working with industry partners outside of the school and securing funding, grant writing, all of the stuff that I then got exposed to. And it was like trying to drink from a fire hose because there was so much that goes into running a school, especially multiple campuses and millions of dollars in funding. And, so getting that aspect of it, and Charlie with the golden ticket, man, it's just like in the Wonka factory, just walking around and just looking around and loving everything and getting the factory turned over to me in the end, and I was like, man, and now I have one boss, which is the president of this college's 4 campuses. And I got to had meetings with the governor's office, with Betsy DeVos, the educational secretary for the Trump administration, had meetings in person with and discussing the future educational initiatives. So it was a very great opportunity to be there and experience that. And while I'm in the midst of all of this, COVID happens. That was an opportunity to figure out what I love to do. And there was so much uncertainty, especially in education at that time during COVID. I mean, especially for the trade programs, it's like, if you can't go to class and do the trade, how are you supposed to learn how to do it? Like, how do I become a welder without welding? You can't. Love that opportunity, but I did make the switch. So there's a county right south of Nashville called Rutherford County, and I took a position there as the grant director. And as the grant director, I worked for the mayor, so worked in the mayor's office. But as a grant director, it just it opened my community up like a book, so it was like working in the educational sector was as fantastic and great as it was still limited to just education. It was just this age demographic. It was just this programs. It was just these instructors, and it's fantastic. And like I said, don't get me wrong, I loved every second of it. But as the grant director, it was like, I don't know, like a big boy job version of that or something, But in the meantime, in the behind the scenes of this, I was DJing. I was running photo booths, and that was like my side hustle, right? So I could make some money on the weekends. Working for the government's great, but no one works for the government to get rich. Well, not locally anyway, maybe in DC. But, and that was like my side hustle. And I was like, and I really didn't take it seriously. And I mean, you got somebody who's doctor or whatever, and it's like, wait, you're a DJ? Like, that doesn't make any sense, So, and I remember being engaged at the time, coming home and telling my then fiance, the guy she's going to marry, who's this doctor who works for the government, who's working towards his pension and retirement, I'm going to quit everything and I'm a DJ full time. And I was like, but I still want you to marry me, so go explain it to your mom somehow. But it all worked out. She stuck with me, so we got married. But she was super understanding when I finally left, because I was kind of on the fence. And before, I was it wasn't just like this decision made in a vacuum by no means. But got several people I trust and got their opinions on it. But I remember talking to my then boss about it, and I was like, there's a piece of me that wants to try this full time. And I was like, but I'd been working for the government since I was 19. I was 30, and I'm like, am I going to throw away 11 years with the government to go be a DJ in my 30s? Am I having a midlife crisis? It's like, what's going on right now? So, and my boss at the time, she was like, obviously, I don't want to rehire your role and retrain someone to do all the stuff you do. And we really appreciate you here and you do a great job. She was like, but if you don't do it, you're going to look back and be like, what if? She's like, go try it. She's like, if your lights are not about to get turned off, there's nothing stop. She's like, your resume and your credentials are crazy. Like, anybody would hire you tomorrow. You could put in a new job application and get a new job next week. It's not like you're saying I can never work again for anybody. It's not like you quit this job and there are no more other jobs, So, and I was like, well, that's a good point. And she was like, well, and if you're that worried about it, just find somewhere part-time and just focus on that. And what would I be doing if I wasn't at work? So then I got to thinking about that. So, and I was like, well, there's these networking events, there's these mixers, there's these, open houses, there's all this other stuff with these venues and these planners and these organizers and these meeting professionals and all the stuff that I've never met, that I don't know. And if I'm making enough money now to quit my day job, how much money will I make if I knew all these people and they liked me and they referred me business? So there's no guarantees in that, of course, because maybe they hate you, but I did. And needless to say, it's worked out extremely well now. So much that I actually won 2022 Entertainer of the Year for Nashville. And it was just, hey, I see everybody doing their thing. I just want to do it my way and just being super analytical with it, like anything else I do. And very stickler on my processes and deliveries and client interaction and engagements and every little aspect of being a small business owner, the marketing, the social media, the whatever. And it got to a point to where it just took a life of its own. And it eventually got to a point to where, at least where I am now, it's like, I don't have to go to any networking thing. I don't have to meet anybody. I mean, I was at an event last week and one of the photographers I'd never worked with before saw my name on the planning form and automatically knew who I was. It's weird because it's like when I was 19, I was on that frontier of, those questions. I want to make more money. I want to do something different. And I want to ultimately transition out of what I'm doing, which was at the time college. So then in the military, 10 years later. And even though now I'm successful, and I'm not saying completely get away from events or whatever by no means, but it's like I've had so many people call me or literally was like, hey man, I will pay you to just talk to me for an hour. And I was like, you have to pay me to talk? What do you mean? Like, it's like, man, I got so many questions, dude. What's it worth to you? And I was like, I don't know. I've never charged anybody to talk to me before, So, and I remember charging like $25 an hour or something like that. I was like, I don't know, $25 an hour. I was like, is that okay? And it's like, oh, dude, here you go. And then, then that slowly grew to like $100 an hour and, whatever. And I was like, and it was weird because I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time. And one of my buddies was like, oh, so you opened a consulting business? And I was like, no. He was like, well, don't you have a bunch of consulting clients? And I was like, no. Like that thought hadn't even registered to me. I was doing it without intentionally doing it or planning to do it, I guess. And I'm even getting referred to like online. I was getting tagged in Facebook and people like asking these certain questions like, oh, you got to talk to Tom and, call this dude. Like, this is the guy. So it just it was so funny. It was like a full circle type thing of trying to rationalize and realize what I was even doing. And I met this guy, but he was different because he was like 57 at the time or something, It's like he had kind of sunset that phase. Like he wasn't in the hunt like these young 20s, young 30s, and found his niche in corporate event in comedy. And it was like the universe was telling me to call this guy. So I did. I was like, hey man, can I give you a call? And got to catching up with him. I was like, hey man, what you been doing lately? I haven't talked to you, haven't seen you anywhere. You good? He was like, oh yeah, man, I just been in this, doing all these speeches and stuff. What do you mean? And he's like, oh, I've been a public speaker for about 2 years now. It's kind of what I do full time. For full-time public speaker, so he kind of got me really thinking about that. And I was like, well, what do you charge? Man, he starts talking about these booking fees. And I'm like, you're talking 7-8 grand for 10-15 minutes of your time, 20-minute talks for 8 grand. Wow. And he talked about how he worked, I don't know what he said, 16 days or something, or 18 days and made $160,000 or something. It was something crazy. I was like, I worked a lot more than that. So was like, man, I'm grinding 5 days a week over here trying to like figure out, doing all this prep work and loading. I'm getting old. I'm lifting gear and doing all these events. And, I guess I was comparing it is like when you're on that side of the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz is like you make this production and you go monitor the sound and the lighting and whatever behind the curtain, and all of this event is happening. And I was like, yeah. And he said, you should try coming from behind the curtain and standing on the stage. He's like, man, you got great stories to tell. He was like, he's like, people will pay you to tell them. And then I was telling him how I got into the consulting thing and the business coaching. And he's like, well, that's essentially it. Just put that in a speech and give it to a room of 400 people at the same time. So that's kind of just been my journey from a kid from nowhere to a public speaker and entertainer in Nashville. And most recently, it's been about figuring which stories to tell and how do I build programs around that? And how do I structure this? And how do I make a career as a speaker? What does that look like for me? So now I've been booking a lot of podcast opportunities and stuff as well. So just getting these opportunities that I've been super grateful to tell my story. And like I said, it's the wave tops, so it's like when I start breaking down to what is public speaking, and I was like, a teacher does every day, so it's what a sergeant in the military does every day. It's what a college kid with his group of friends, and he's influencing them, right, to do stupid stuff probably, but better for worse, it's what you're doing every day. How do you put it on a pretty website and sell it? So that really comes down to a principle that I always say. And I have friends who do all sorts of different things and could do whatever they wanted to quite frankly, multi-talented people. And we always have a joke that kind of we say between each other that it goes, it's not what can you do, it's what do you want to do. So it's such an eclectic group of friends because it's like, man, I got friends who are outstanding DJs, lighting designers, singers and musicians, stage designers, florists or photographers, cosmetologists, all kinds of different things. But everybody has the same mindset. Everybody has the same, I guess you call that entrepreneurial spirit or whatever you want. But everybody has the same logic of the only thing holding you back is yourself. So when you surround yourself by those types of people and that type of mentality, man, you start losing excuses for yourself. Because when you start hearing other people's stories and what other people's overcome and their backgrounds, it's like, what do I mean I can't go do this? It's like there's people who've progressed much further than me in less life than I have. I mean, you got these 8-year-olds on YouTube making $20 million a year playing video games.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want to do, So my mantra, is be yourself and profit, right? So that's my message. And what that means is quite literally what it says. So be yourself and profit, whether that's financially, whether that's through your relationships, your friendships, because in my experience is the most profitable things I've ever done, whether it was a business decision, making financial whatever, or becoming a DJ, like I told that story. It's one of the best financial decisions I ever made, and it was just literally me doing the thing that I like to do on the weekends, except doing it full time. But also, if being yourself loses you a friend, then that person was never your friend. They liked the pretend version, maybe, that you were, or whatever face or mask you want to wear, but your real friends like you for who you are, so, and whatever flaws that has or perks, or not everybody's all bad, not everybody's all good, but your family as well. And I say family loosely, family's not always blood. I got blood brothers that I'm less close to than some friends who I'm not blood with, who are closer than some of my brothers. So, and I got a cousin who's closest to me of all, of literally anyone. So he's not my brother, but he's closer to me than my actual brothers. And we've literally been friends since diapers, so he's seen the whole gambit of who I am and my journey, and he has his own journey. He's got a cool story too. It's just like seeing what you can do and just being who you are. It sounds so simple. There's people who have sketch comedy. There's people who do makeup tutorials. There's people who do TikTok dance trends, or it's whatever you like to do, just do it. And if the people around you don't like it, good, because you're going to attract the people who do, and that's the people who matter. You're going to lose a lot of fake people in the process of finding yourself, because you're losing the fake version of you. And that's just maturity, really. It's not uncommon, growing up wanting to be different race, wanting to be a different gender, wanting to be a different whatever, It's not uncommon. It's very common, actually. So, I mean, I can relate to that 100%. I think everybody can relate to that. Like,
That's very common in the
yeah,
Caribbean,
yeah.
colors. Yeah.
Well, and you relate it to success, right? So it's like, if I looked like this other person, I would be successful. Or if I had this job that they had, I would be successful. And it's like, well, you haven't done what it takes to get the job that they have. Like, they went to law school and, and interned and did all of this stuff to become a lawyer, and then worked very hard to become successful at being a lawyer, So that's why they're a successful lawyer, So they didn't just wake up like that today, So they really wanted it. You got to really want it. You don't accidentally become a lawyer. You're not going to accidentally become a MD doctor, You don't fall into a PhD, I guarantee it. And I say this all the time, and people will find a way to do whatever they want to do. I talk to this in my clients a lot. It's like, you will find a way to do whatever you want to do. It's like, make any excuse for yourself, whatever you want. You wake up every morning and lie to yourself. It doesn't matter. You will find a way to do what you want to do. If doing what makes you happy doesn't hurt, harm, maim anyone else, I mean, go for it. And that's just kind of my message. And, and I've done a bunch of ridiculous stuff for the wrong reasons. But retrospectively, looking at that, it was all for the wrong reason. So it was like all for what other people thought of me at the time. So it sounded cool to be in special operations in the military. Like, it sounds cool to insert whatever. When you're in college, it sounds real cool to a high schooler. But it was like something in my own mind, or something that internally I wasn't satisfied with within myself. So whenever, ironically enough, whenever I quit everything, became a DJ, that was the first time in my life that I was just being me and didn't care what anyone else thought about it. And I made more money being me than any degree could have ever gotten me, any type of whatever, any of that, any job would have ever paid me. And there's people who do it at a much higher level than me, or who are much more successful at it than I am. I mean, who are on touring DJ producers, who make millions of dollars. I'm a footnote in compared to what it could be. And that's kind of how I knew I was doing the right thing, because that was the first time where being where I was and doing what I was doing was okay. I didn't feel the need to be Steve Aoki. It's like when I was in the military, I was like, I need to be special operations and the baddest dude around, and it was like, I need to go flex on somebody for something. I need to spend money on something stupid to get a status symbol, or be materialistic, which also grew up poor. So that has an aspect to it as well. So you want to go have things that you never thought you could have. And that perception just evolved. Like, once I got married, and it was like, man, my wife and I are traveling to all of these locations that people where I'm from don't travel to. They don't go to Vegas. They don't go to the Bahamas. They don't go to Cancun or Cabo, or, there's the things you see on TV. It's not supposed to be your life. And I didn't do it to have a story to flex on my cousins or something. It's like I did it just because I wanted to share these memories with my wife, before we ultimately have our own children and have these stories together. And my wife, God love her, she's super patient with me, but because she's all the time kind of just seeing me be me, and she's there and supports it, and one day, and we don't have kids yet, but I'm sure one day we will, but hopefully I'll be able to pass this logic down to them, to where I can just encourage them to be their selves, if I do end up having multiple children. But in the meantime, I'm going to use the world as my children. And I just want people to understand and comprehend that there's nothing wrong with you. Whatever you think it is, it's not wrong. It's who you are. You're unique, and embrace it. Like whatever you think is wrong with you, it's not. So yeah, so I mean, it's just be yourself, stay true to yourself, and as long as you do that, you'll surround yourself with the people who are supposed to be around you.
You know, that's an excellent way to kind of climax this because, you know, there were a lot of gems you pushed out there: be yourself to profit, empathy, authenticity. You really pushed a lot of big and massive lessons. And I definitely learned a lot here from you. And I think, you know, to kind of just close off this interview here, I think this is something that not I needed, but I think the audience needed. And I think one last question I like to ask is kind of how can we reach out to you and kind of
For
get
sure.
to know you more often? Maybe get into your new podcast or any new thing.
Sure, for sure. So I'll definitely be starting a new podcast. There won't be any guests on my podcast. So mine will be a little bit different. So it's really going to be like a self journal. So in that podcast, and you can find all of this, by the way, at tom-covington.com, Covington. And it has all my social media links at the footer of that, by the way. So you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, whatever. So that's tom-covington.com. That podcast is solely going to be, each episode will have a theme. And each episode I'll tell a story. Each one will have a centralized theme, but it's all based on authenticity. So how to be your authentic self on social media. That'll be an episode. And what the benefits are, how I've done that, how I've benefited from that. How to be your authentic self in your family dynamic. That'll be the story about my brother, you know. So there's actually going to be one that's going to be about embracing your culture. And then there's going to be an episode about, you know, breaking your stereotypes. Each episode will be unique within itself, and they'll have stories associated to the central topic. But that podcast will be called Be Yourself and Profit. So each story will be about me and a story of how I was myself, maybe some rags to riches kind of stories, but how ultimately being myself led me to profit in whatever case that was, whether it was family or culture or relationships, friendships, financial. So yeah, so it'll be kind of a journey. So I'm going to start with 15 episodes for season 1 and see how it goes and get some new topics for season 2 and launch that one as well. So stay tuned.
So thank you again for being on the show, Dr. Covington. It really was a privilege. And I hope all of you that are watching this show also gain some insight here. And I will be seeing you all next time.
Thanks, Jimbo. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm currently working on a passion project that I'm really excited about, but I need your help to bring it to life. We will be launching soon our very own Jimbo Paris Academy. And this is going to be about aspiring creators and creating concepts. Thank you for your support. I'm sharing free bonus content to supporters. So let's make some amazing content together. Our affiliate partner, LifeWork Systems, focused on helping create a better collegial environment, looking at the mental health of business workers, business employees, and overall bringing the business up. Thank you for listening to the Jimbo Paris Show.